The studio lights at Fox News were calibrated to perfection, cool, clinical, and meant to flatter one man only. Tucker Carlson sat behind his signature desk, smirking. The night's headline? Unmasking African Nationalism, with guest Ibrahim Traoré. But what viewers didn't know was that behind the scenes, producers were already crafting the narrative. Sound cues were set to interrupt. Clips were edited to frame. And the opening monologue? Full of the usual venom. He governs a land drowning in poverty but wants to lecture the West. Fascinating, right? Tucker quipped into the camera, drawing laughs from the studio crew. Ibrahim Traoré, however, didn't flinch. Sitting across from Tucker, dressed in a simple dark green tunic with no flag pin, no prepared notes, and no visible security, he looked completely unbothered. "I guess we're skipping diplomacy tonight," he said, calmly folding his hands. Tucker leaned forward. "Oh, I believe in honesty, Captain Traoré. You parade as a revolutionary, but your country survives on Western aid. You talk of freedom while cozying up to authoritarians. Isn't that the definition of hypocrisy?" The trap was set. But Traoré didn't blink. He looked straight into the camera, then back at Tucker. "You call it aid. We call it interest-bearing shackles. You call it democracy. We see puppetry dressed in ballots. And if you think raising your voice will raise your position, you misunderstand power." A sharp silence followed. Tucker, momentarily frozen, cracked a half-laugh, then pivoted. "So you deny your people are suffering?" "No. I say we suffer because people like you confuse charity with chains," Traoré answered. The control room was already buzzing. Producers whispered frantically into earpieces. This wasn't going to plan. The African president was supposed to snap, to rant, to confirm every stereotype the audience came in with. But instead, he was dismantling the platform, one sentence at a time. Tucker tried again, this time faster, louder. "You've jailed journalists. You've kicked out American NGOs. That's not liberation, it's regression." Traoré simply smiled. "If colonial reporting is journalism and economic surveillance is charity, then yes, we've regressed. Willingly." The smirk on Tucker's face faltered. For the first time in years, he wasn't in control. And America was watching. Tucker Carlson's smirk had always been his armor. A subtle raise of the lip here, a narrowed eye there, tools honed over decades to maintain dominance in front of a lens. But tonight, across from Ibrahim Traoré, that armor was cracking. And America could feel it. As the commercial break countdown hit the screen, the camera light blinked red, off-air. Tucker exhaled sharply and leaned toward Traoré. "You came here to grandstand, but you're not in Ouagadougou anymore. This is Fox. This is America." Traoré didn't break eye contact. "Then perhaps you should have invited someone who still listens when Africa speaks." In the control room, the executive producer barked orders. "Cut his mic if he tries to hijack the segment again. Carlson's gotta re-establish control next block." But back on set, the game was shifting. The second half began with a loaded montage, chaotic street footage, cherry-picked headlines, a narrator ominously asking, "Is this the face of modern tyranny?" When the camera returned to the studio, Tucker wore his classic, "I'm concerned" expression. "Mr. Traoré," he began, feigning sincerity, "why is it that every time an African leader is challenged, they play the colonization card instead of taking responsibility?" Traoré leaned forward slowly. "Because the colonization card was never removed from the deck." That line hit hard. Not just for the studio, but for the millions watching across social platforms as the clip began trending in real time. Hashtag Traoré vs Tucker. Hashtag colonization card. Hashtag Africa speaks. Tucker tried to interrupt again. "But don't you think it's dangerous to always blame the past?" "I don't blame the past," Traoré interjected. I blame those who still profit from pretending it's over. Tucker's hand tightened around his pen. He turned toward the camera, tried to wrap the segment, but the rhythm was broken. Then came the final jab from Traoré. You built this show on fear. Fear of difference. Fear of losing control. But I didn't come here to make you afraid, Tucker, I came to show you that your fear has already arrived. And it's not me. It's truth. There was no teleprompter for that. And for the first time, Tucker looked like he wanted the cameras off. The studio was never this quiet. Even in breaks, there was usually chatter, interns whispering, cameramen adjusting gear, producers laughing nervously behind the glass. But after Traoré's last line, the silence in the room wasn't technical, it was emotional. No one dared move. Tucker Carlson cleared his throat. Let's talk real numbers, shall we? He said, forcing a chuckle. Burkina Faso ranks 144th on the Human Development Index. You boast about independence, yet your people live on less than $2 a day. Traoré tilted his head, almost studying him. Then, softly, he said. And yet they eat what they grow, not what was processed 10,000 miles away. They vote without billionaires funding their choices. They survive drought, war, and foreign manipulation, and still dance in the streets. Tucker snapped, so poverty is virtue now? No, Traoré said firmly. But dependency dressed as prosperity? That's your illusion, not ours. The audience, watching from homes, campuses, phones and bars, could feel the shift. Traoré wasn't defensive. He was exposing a script. And Tucker, for once, was clinging to his. He tried again, this time pressing harder. Let's not pretend like you don't silence critics. Just last month, your government arrested 3 journalists. For taking bribes from foreign contractors to publish disinformation, Traoré finished. They weren't reporting. They were laundering lies. Tucker's face twitched. So you're the final judge of what's true? No, Traoré answered. The people are. Which is why I came here. So they could hear what your studio normally mutes. Then he paused, calculated, calm, and asked a question that caught everyone off guard. May I ask you something personal, Tucker? Carlson hesitated. Go ahead. How does it feel, Traoré said slowly, to have a voice that's always heard, and still say nothing? Dead silence. The camera stayed on Tucker for a second too long. His forced smirk returned, but it was thinner now. Nervous. Fragile. In the background, a stagehand dropped a pen. The noise echoed. The control room was in panic mode. They had underestimated him, completely. What was supposed to be a segment built to ridicule Traoré had turned into a slow dismantling of Tucker's authority, broadcast live to millions. The Fox News executive producer barked, cut to commercial. We'll regroup. But before they could pull the feed, Traoré leaned forward once more, calmly, almost kindly, and said. You've spent years defining America's enemies. Immigrants, protesters, outsiders, anyone who doesn't look like your mirror. But what if the real threat isn't out there? What if it's the comfort in never being questioned? Tucker raised his voice. Don't you lecture me on threats. You run a military regime. You ousted a government at gunpoint. And yet, Traoré said without blinking, I've never hosted a war on another continent. Tucker's jaw visibly clenched. The network's commercial break cue blinked again. But the camera director, sensing something historic, hesitated. He let it roll. The tension was electric, and irresistible. Carlson attempted to regroup. You sound proud of isolation. Do you want to cut yourself off from the world? Traoré shook his head slowly. No. We want to join the world. Just not one where truth has to wear makeup and freedom has to pass a script test. Carlson exhaled through his nose. You really think you're winning hearts here? I'm not here to win hearts, Traoré replied. I'm here to expose a mind that's already closed. The chat on YouTube and Twitter was exploding. He's flipping the script live. Did Traoré just own Tucker on his own show? This is history. Tucker's producers were furious now. One screamed into Carlson's earpiece. Take control. Now. Frame him as radical, shift the tone. So Tucker went for the kill. You don't belong in the room with real power, he snapped. You're a figurehead. You lead a country barely visible on the map. That's when Traoré paused, longer than usual. Then, with that same unshaken tone, he said. You fear small nations with strong voices. Because for too long, big nations have had loud voices with empty hearts. And for the second time that night, Tucker Carlson had no comeback. The lights above them were hot, but the temperature in the room had dropped. Because power wasn't in the desk anymore. It was sitting across from it. By now, the live broadcast had become something else entirely. What began as an ambush interview had transformed into a public reckoning, and Tucker Carlson was losing control of the narrative faster than he could talk. But he wasn't done swinging. He straightened up, eyes sharp, voice cooler. Let's be honest. You're here for image. You want to look like a hero on the global stage, while your country struggles with electricity, infrastructure, terrorism. And yet, Traoré interrupted, you're the one sitting under lights powered by debt and cameras that serve illusion. Carlson blinked. The audience on social media erupted again. He didn't come to play. Is this the first time Tucker's been humbled on his own show? Traoré is rewriting the rules. Tucker leaned in. You talk like a philosopher, but act like a soldier. Do you think dressing down the West makes you noble? I think dressing truth in silence makes you a coward, Traoré answered. There was no venom in his tone. Just wait. You're clever, Tucker muttered. I'll give you that. But clever doesn't mean credible. Credibility, Traoré replied, isn't decided by who has the camera. It's earned by who dares to speak without needing one. The room shifted again. The sound technicians had stopped adjusting levels. Even the camera operators, trained to remain robotic, were visibly holding their breath. Everyone could sense it, this was no longer a talk show. This was a courtroom. And the prosecution had turned to face the judge. Carlson made one final push. Are you saying American voices don't matter? Traoré didn't even hesitate. I'm saying American voices matter less when they never listen. Boom. It hit like a thunderclap. Not just in the studio, but across the country. Cable anchors paused to take notes. Reaction videos were already circulating. Analysts scrambled for damage control. This wasn't just a viral moment. This was a shift. Tucker Carlson, the man used to cornering guests with questions, had become the one questioned. And he had no idea how to escape the answer. By now, something strange was happening. Not just online, but in the room. Tucker Carlson, America's most watched political voice, was losing oxygen. Not because he lacked the facts, but because he lacked the gravity. And Traoré? He wasn't yelling. He wasn't even sweating. He was just present. More present than any guest Carlson had faced in years. So Tucker pivoted again, this time, to his audience. Let me ask the American people watching this, he said, turning to the camera with his signature populist cadence, do we want to be lectured by someone who jailed opposition leaders? Who shut out American aid workers? Who praises Russia and Iran? He turned back to Traoré. Or should we demand better values from those we allow on our airwaves? A solid blow. His crowd would cheer it. But Traoré wasn't shaken. In fact, he leaned slightly forward, elbows on his knees, intimate, controlled. You say you value freedom, he said. But you confuse freedom with permission. You want Africa to be free, so long as it stays small. So long as it plays your game. So long as it obeys your script. Carlson squinted. That's rich, coming from a man whose country receives U.S. food aid. And yet every grain comes with a condition, Traoré replied. And every condition comes with silence. Tell me, Tucker, why must our children starve for us to be heard? For a full 4 seconds, there was no reply. Just air. Then, a crack appeared. Tucker looked down at his notes, something he hadn't done once the entire night. His fingers twitched. The camera zoomed in slightly, catching the first unmistakable signs of discomfort. Traoré wasn't just answering him. He was disarming him. Tonight, Traoré said quietly, you invited me into a room built to trap my voice. But the echo chamber forgot one thing: if you speak long enough without listening, eventually the silence will speak back. And in that moment, for the first time in his career, Tucker Carlson looked genuinely unsure whether he wanted the segment to continue. The feed was still live. But the grip was slipping. And the world was watching. Tucker Carlson wasn't used to losing ground. Not on his stage. Not in front of a camera. Not with millions of viewers expecting him to dominate. He glanced off camera again, hoping for a lifeline from producers. But they were as silent as he was now. He squared his shoulders. One last strike. You speak of silence, Tucker said, his tone harder now. But you silence dissent. You run a regime. No elections. No accountability. You may impress TikTok, Mr. Traoré, but not history. He paused, expecting applause from the digital choir. But Traoré didn't flinch. No elections, he repeated, calm as ever. I lead a nation that overthrew a puppet government put in place by outside forces. Our streets bled for the right to start over. And you dare measure democracy by the frequency of your ballots, not the integrity of your choices? He looked directly into the camera. We do not fear elections. We fear illusions. And you, Tucker, you've built a career selling them. The control room wanted to cut away. Cut to commercial. Cut to anything. But the network had gambled on a live showdown. And now, they were stuck in a checkmate. Tucker pushed again. You think you're brave for coming here and talking tough, but I bet you wouldn't survive a week in our political system. Traoré's eyebrows lifted slightly. Survive? Tucker, I didn't come here to survive. I came to remind you, some of us were born in struggle. And we don't see your system as a summit, we see it as a cage. The words hit harder than any data point could. Because deep down, even Carlson's viewers could feel it, this wasn't the normal guest. This wasn't someone trying to impress or convert. This was someone telling the truth as he saw it. Unapologetically. You came to humiliate me, Traoré said finally, but it's not humiliation when the truth hurts. That's just the sound of illusion dying. Carlson stared at him. No counter. No spin. Just the haunting realization. He'd lost. By the time the final segment began, it was too late. Clips of the confrontation had already gone viral. TikTok edits were slicing up Traoré's replies like poetry. Twitter was ablaze with comparisons. Gen Z dubbed him the calm storm. Gen X was stunned into silence. Even boomers were texting links to their friends with one word. Watch. Tucker's team, seeing the backlash unfold in real time, scrambled to spin the moment. They pushed headlines. Traoré deflects on human rights violations. Foreign strongman avoids accountability. But none of it stuck. Why? Because people had already seen the footage, raw, unedited, and unscripted. They had heard Traoré speak without shouting, dismantle without mocking, and hold the line without folding. In a world trained to expect noise, his stillness had become the loudest thing in the room. Back in the studio, Tucker tried one last Hail Mary. His voice steadied, his face neutral. "Mr. Traoré, for all your criticism of the West, you came here. You sat in our studio. You used our airwaves. Isn't that hypocrisy?" Traoré smiled softly. "No, Tucker. That's strategy." The crowd watching online lit up. "I came here," he continued, "because your people deserve to hear something unscripted. Something unfiltered. You mock us when we stay silent. And when we speak, you call it hypocrisy. Maybe the truth is, your system only accepts voices it can control." Tucker opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence returned, heavier this time. Traoré sat back, hands folded. "I didn't come to debate you," he said. "I came to expose you." The show ended. But the impact didn't. Within minutes, YouTube clips titled, "Traoré vs. Tucker," full, climbed trending lists. Journalists, stunned, admitted it was one of the most commanding international interviews in recent memory. A guest who had flipped the dynamic, not by shouting, but by refusing to be shaken. And somewhere in a dark studio corner, Carlson stared at the replay monitor. Still trying to understand when exactly he lost control. Within 24 hours, the interview had gone global. African leaders publicly applauded Traoré's composure. European commentators were forced to admit the obvious: a leader from the so-called periphery had just humbled one of the West's loudest media giants, on his own turf, under his own lights. The White House issued a carefully worded statement, avoiding direct reference to the interview, but urging respectful international dialogue. Translation: damage control. Meanwhile, Fox News executives met behind closed doors. One producer reportedly said, "We invited him thinking it'd be a spectacle. Turns out, we were the spectacle." Back in Burkina Faso, watch parties had erupted the night before. Young people in Ouagadougou and Bobo Dioulasso stayed up past midnight, watching their president on phones, radios, and rooftops. They didn't just see a man, they saw themselves, finally seen. But perhaps the most surreal moment came when CNN's Anderson Cooper referenced the broadcast on air. "Whether you support Traoré or not, what we witnessed last night was something rare, an African leader sitting on a Western media platform, and refusing to flinch." Tucker Carlson remained silent the entire day after. No tweet. No response. No victory lap. Because there was nothing to celebrate. His fans were divided, some trying to salvage pride, others reluctantly admitting, he got owned. But for Traoré, the mission was never about scoring points. In a private moment backstage, as his team gathered his notes, he told his translator, "We didn't come to make noise. We came to break the spell." And break it, he had. Not just for his country. Not just for Africa. But for every unheard voice that's been spoken over, mocked, or erased in the name of control. He hadn't just survived Tucker Carlson's show. He had redefined what it meant to be unshakable in the face of it. The plane touched down in Ouagadougou under an evening sky streaked with gold. The sun had begun its descent, but the people were rising. Thousands lined the runway, not with flags or fanfare, but with silence and steady eyes. They had seen the broadcast. They had heard every word. Traoré stepped off the stairs not as a man returning from a media tour, but as a voice that had broken through centuries of noise. He didn't wave. He didn't smile for cameras. He simply walked, shoulders square, through a crowd that had waited not for a hero, but for confirmation that dignity doesn't need permission. Across the world, the aftermath rippled. College students in Boston hosted discussion panels titled, "When the West Got Schooled." In Ghana, a mural appeared overnight, Traoré on one side, Tucker Carlson on the other, silenced by a shattered megaphone. And in the US, late-night comedians tried to spin the moment with jokes. But the laughs didn't land. Because deep down, viewers remembered something unfamiliar, a guest who didn't lose his cool, didn't chase applause, and didn't ask for understanding. He demanded it. Back in his residence, Traoré stood on the balcony alone, overlooking the quiet city. One aide entered with his phone. "It's trending again," he said. "You're being called the man who spoke without a script." Traoré didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had said what needed to be said. And now, the world would have to sit with it. Not because he shouted, but because he never blinked. As the stars emerged above the capital, so did a truth too often buried. You don't need to raise your voice, when you carry the weight of 1,000 silenced ones behind it. And in that silence, nations began to listen. They thought he came for the spotlight. But he came for the silence. In a world where power shouts and truth gets edited out, one man sat in the lion's den, and didn't flinch. Traoré didn't try to be louder. He chose to be clearer. And in that clarity, something cracked. Not just in the studio, but in the illusion of control. This wasn't about east or west, left or right. It was about who gets to speak, and who's told to stay silent. Last night, a voice from Burkina Faso echoed across the world. And no studio, no headline, no host could contain it. They tried to shut him down. But all they did, was turn up the volume.